what I want to talk to you about today is a veritable revolution in thinking about the life on Earth. When I went to school, and probably even for my daughter in school today, all life was divided into two great kingdoms, animals and plants. We now realize that animals and plants are almost identical, even though they don't seem that way to us. They're extremely similar to each other, and that there are organisms alive today that are very different from animals and plants. And in fact, they constitute three other kingdoms of life. We now recognize 5 kingdoms of life, animals and plants, of course, and 3 others. And what I want to do is talk to you today about what those 5 kingdoms are and how they have evolved over time. That is, how they've appeared in the fossil history of the Earth. The first thing we're going to do is look at a chart of what these 5 kingdoms are. First, of course, we have the green plants, which include ferns and cone-bearing trees and all of the trees and herbs and shrubs that we're all very familiar with, and mosses. Those are the kingdom plants, and those are defined as phototrophic organisms, organisms that make their own food using the light. Then we have the animals. There are about 30 or so different groups of animals, not just the familiar mammals and lizards and so on, and the insects and the sea animals that we all know about, but there are all kinds of deep sea worms and very obscure little animals that only live in the nasal cavities of other animals, and there's it's a very diverse group. All of those animals have to eat other food. They can't make their own food, and they all develop from embryos. There's always a sperm that fertilizes an egg, and it develops into an embryo, and that's what makes an animal. So we have the familiar animals and plants. But what are the other 3 kingdoms, the newly recognized kingdoms? Well, one of them are fungi, and you all know fungi because those include the molds and the mushrooms. And they never form embryos, and they are, the way their internal cells work is really very different from the animals. And in fact, we're going to see a scene of fungi mating. They never form sperm and egg and embryos the way animals do. Now, in addition to the animals, plants, and fungi, there are 2 other really different kingdoms of organisms. One, the first to have appeared very early in the history of the Earth, are the monarans, they're called. These are the bacteria. There are about 16 groups of bacteria. Some of them are photosynthetic and they make their own food, and many of them aren't. And there's motility in them, and some of them are large, some of them are small, and so on. But all of them are distinguished by the total lack of a nucleus. They have no nucleus and no nuclear membrane. Their cellular organization is very different from the rest of the organisms. And what is interesting is their chemistry is much more complicated and diverse. So although they're small little packages, from a chemical point of view, they're really much more different from each other and from the rest of the organisms. So those 4 kingdoms are relatively clear: plants, animals, and fungi, the large conspicuous organisms, and bacteria. What about this middle yellow kingdom? Well, that middle yellow kingdom, the name of it is protoctists or protists, and they are a less known group of aquatic organisms. These organisms don't form, they never form embryos either, and they have bizarre life cycles, as we'll see in some examples. These organisms, the protoctists, include algae, water molds, protozoa, slime nets, slime molds, and about 30 other different groups of organisms.